So at the end of last year, the state of Georgia was required to change its congressional maps to add another majority black district in order to comply with the Voting Rights Act. And so far, the Georgia map that has currently been put forward has passed the muster of a federal judge and has been approved, which means these will be the new House district lines for Georgia in 2024 and to the rest of the decade. So we're going to take a look at the new map that's been passed by the Georgia legislature and signed by Governor Kemp and compare it to the old map, as well as talk about Georgia's political trends as a whole as compared to this new map, because of course this is a big victory for Republicans, because had this case gone a different way and had a new majority Democratic district had to have been drawn, it would have put Republicans at a further disadvantage ahead of this year's House elections, which they are projected so far to lose, since redistricting alone has put them down a couple of seats. And in a House of Representatives where the majority is held by just a few votes, and you have George Santos, who was expelled from the House at the end of last year, it really puts the Republicans in a precarious position to take back the majority in 2024. So we're going to get to all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. So this is the new House map that the Georgia Republicans came up with. It has 5 safe Democratic seats, or 5 leaning Democratic seats. This one's essentially safe. It's a Biden plus 10, and 9 Republican majority seats. So this basically leaves the balance of power in the Georgia House essentially unchanged when it comes to federal representation, because back in 2020, the makeup was essentially the same in the House of Representatives. And we're going to talk about some of the few differences that there are in these maps, because Georgia Republicans have actually designed this map to last even longer as a solid Republican map as opposed to the one passed back in 2020. Now, the balance of power in Georgia really hinges on the Atlanta suburbs, and as you can see by this map, most of the inner Atlanta suburbs are safe Democratic. These are huge Democratic voting areas. In many cases, you have large black populations here. So many people thought that there was going to be another Democratic majority seat in the Atlanta metro area, but the way Republicans drew the map actually did pass a federal judge's muster for this requirement. But if we take a look at these districts here, District 11 is a 60-38 Republican district. District 7 is a Republican plus 19 district. And I'm basing these numbers off of the 2020 election, in which Donald Trump narrowly lost the state of Georgia to Joe Biden. So far, that's the bluest Georgia's been in decades, and this map holds pretty solid, especially in the Atlanta metro area for the Republican Party. We could compare it, of course, to the maps that were ruled unconstitutional by a former judge, and these districts north of Atlanta are actually more Democratic leaning. District 11 is a Trump plus 15 district, same with District 6. So in many ways, this map actually helps Republicans long-term over the next decade, because Georgia is likely to continue to get more and more Democratic as the Atlanta suburbs continue to trend away from the Republican Party. Part of that is because of demographic issues. Part of it's because of where the Republican Party has moved over the last 8 years. But looking at these trends, it's unmistakable that the Republicans have a massive issue in Metro Atlanta. And this is the singular reason why the state of Georgia is even competitive remotely, because if we go back, for instance, to the 2016 election, the Atlanta metro area was considerably more Republican. Now, Cobb and Gwinnett County were both blue counties in 2016, but the margins of which Hillary Clinton won these counties was very small by comparison to today's numbers. Of course, Cobb County going to Clinton by 2 points, Gwinnett County going to Clinton by almost 6. In today's map, of course, in 2020, you have Gwinnett County going to Joe Biden by 18 points, Cobb County going to Joe Biden by 14 points. So this is really a massive shift over the past 4 years, and it's really due to the fact that you have so many people moving into the Atlanta metro area, getting registered to vote. You know, Stacey Abrams was a big part of that, getting minority turnout up in metro Atlanta, and that certainly did help the Democrats a great deal. But also because you've had a lot of white-collar suburban professionals moving to these counties, voting more blue, because Republicans have been struggling with more educated voters over the past couple of decades, and they've really been sliding, especially in the era of Trump, with these types of voters. So, you know, this House map is likely to hold till the end of the decade. I would say the old one of these districts could potentially be at risk of flipping. I would say it's more likely that the 6th district potentially, just because you have northern Fulton County, which has trended very, very blue. And of course, you have Forsyth County here as well, which was a county where Romney got 80% of the vote back in 2012. Donald Trump only got 70% of the vote in 2016, and of course in 2020 Donald Trump only got 65.8% of the vote. So there's been a considerable shift, not just in the more blue counties around Atlanta, but also the red ones as well, where you have a lot of people moving out from Atlanta out into the suburbs and, places like Cherokee and Forsyth, which are really exurban counties. And that's really been driving the political shift in Georgia. Taking a look at some of the past elections we've had, the Herschel Walker versus Raphael Warnock race, these counties are voting about the same as where they were in 2020. So Republicans were failing to really make any inroads with these voters, despite the fact that Brian Kemp on the exact same ballot won the state of Georgia by almost 8 points. And in places like Forsyth County, for instance, he garners 72% of the vote, Cherokee County 74%. Donald Trump only gets 66 and 68% respectively. So, Brian Kemp is able to outrun Donald Trump in not even just the exurban counties, but also the suburban counties. And that's sort of the roadmap for Republicans forward in Georgia, because at this rate, eventually the Atlanta metro area is going to get too big and too blue for Republicans to overcome, similar to how Chicago is in the state of Illinois. But as of right now, Georgia is still very winnable for Republicans if they have the right candidates with the right message. And you really have to appeal to these voters in the Atlanta metro area. You have this county, Fayette County here, Brian Kemp getting 57% of the vote. It's a small exurban county, but if we take a look at, Raphael Warnock's performance here, he almost won the county, almost lost it by a point. Of course, Donald Trump only won the county by 6. So all of these exurban and suburban counties around Atlanta are zooming towards the left, and there's really not a whole lot Republicans can do. The demographics are just becoming too difficult to overcome in Georgia. But in 2024, the state, I think, is still very salvageable. Granted that Republicans actually have the right candidate with the right message, or, if Joe Biden just completely collapses with public opinion and among the general public, and Donald Trump becomes more palatable to the American people. But as of right now, I still don't see that being the case, which is why I still think Georgia leans Democratic, because even though you had Brian Kemp and the other statewide Republicans win back in 2022, this, I believe, was a Trump plus 6 electorate. This was a very Trump electorate in Georgia. Democratic turnout was down. Democratic enthusiasm was down in Georgia. And as a result, you had Brian Kemp win re-election by a pretty large margin, considerable to today. And you had the other statewide Republicans win by like 4, 5, 6 points. So pretty good showings overall. But that's sort of the exception, not the rule. I really think Brian Kemp was the reason why those candidates were carried over the finish line. Also because they weren't really these MAGA-aligned candidates, barring maybe the lieutenant governor, who I think was. But I think that race was very overlooked. But, these maps, I think, will hold up for Republicans till the end of the decade. I think the old maps, the ones we have over here, probably could have risked maybe flipping a seat or two. But barring these maps being struck down, I think Republicans are going to hold on to their 9-5 majority in Georgia, especially as these inner blue districts get even more blue as you have more migration to the state of Georgia and more Democratic voters coming out of the Atlanta metro. But, looking ahead at 2024, some benchmarks that I think need to be hit for Republicans to be able to win the state. You need to be able to get over 70% of the vote here in Forsyth County. Cherokee County, same thing. You need to get 72, 73%, similar to what Brian Kemp got. But, Brian Kemp got 72% and Cherokee got 74%. You need to really get 70 and 72 here for a good showing. Cobb County, you really need to get to sort of single digits. And, of course, Gwinnett, you want to get to low double digits. But, of course, Brian Kemp was exceptional in the Atlanta metro area. So was Brad Raffensperger. But even the other Republicans were able to sort of hold their own in these rapidly leftward trending suburbs. So, this court victory is obviously big for Republicans. We're going to have more redistricting cases as the year goes on. It kind of feels like the lead up to the 2022 midterms, because we talked a lot about redistricting back then, but it's becoming very apparent now because we've had so many court battles. The New York map, I think, is being changed, and we'll see how that honestly works out. That's going to be the independent commission. The so-called independent commission, but I think Democrats, in one way or the other, are probably going to gain at least a seat or two, and of course, in a worst-case scenario, Republicans are going to lose 4 to 5 seats in New York, so that alone would cost Republicans the House, not to mention, of course, the extra Democratic seat in Louisiana, in Alabama. So, Republicans, in terms of the redistricting battle, are still losing. They're only holding their own in Georgia. Of course, North Carolina was a victory for them. They're going to be able to pick up around 3 to 4 seats there. So, it potentially could even out by the time we reach the 2024 election, but it really all depends how the top of the ticket does, how Donald Trump does against Joe Biden, because I still think there's a massive issue among an undersampling with suburban voters, highly educated voters who don't necessarily like Joe Biden, who've soured on him, but will still vote for him over Donald Trump. And that's the same with young voters, the 18 to 35-year-olds that, many in the media have been talking about, have been leaving Joe Biden, have looked down on him because of his handling of, Israel, Palestine, student loan forgiveness, et cetera, et cetera. those voters are not going to vote for Donald Trump. You know, barring, again, some insane circumstance, they're not going to move to Donald Trump in any considerable way. If Donald Trump does win in 2024, it's going to be because of the fact that he does better with white working class voters and improves with minority voters, even as he probably does worse among educated voters. And, you know, I think even in a situation where he beats Joe Biden, he's probably going to slide even more with those voters, because as you have more young people voting, more people college educated, they tend to vote a lot more Democratic. And that's especially the case in the era of Donald Trump, because, you know, white college educated voters had been voting Republican and still vote Republican by small margins. But, you know, Romney was able to win this demographic by a pretty large margin. Now it's really the other way around. Republicans are doing really well with white non-college voters, and they're doing a lot worse with college educated voters. And the reason why that's a problem for them is because college educated voters have a much higher turnout than the white working class, which typically have much depressed turnout, even in presidential elections, but especially in off-year elections like midterms, and of course the elections we had this year in Virginia. So especially in those off-year elections, you're going to have pretty low turnout for them. So it's really a coalition thing. You know, Republicans need to hold their own. They need to do very well in the exurbs, because the area where I think the Democrats did the best as compared to looking at 2016 and 2020, they did best in the exurbs. That was where the biggest shifts, I think, towards the Democrats were. Not even necessarily the suburban counties, because Donald Trump had already been slipping massively compared to Romney in a lot of the suburban counties, but I think the bigger swings really came from the exurban counties, places like Forsyth County in Georgia, Cherokee County. And that's one of the reasons why you have the state of Georgia now in play for the Democrats, and other states like it in the Sun Belt, Arizona, Maricopa County, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, looking ahead, we're going to talk more about these redistricting cases, and we're going to talk more about Georgia, obviously, as this is going to be one of the key states going into 2024. And this could potentially decide the balance of power. Again, I think Georgia, if Republicans do win it, they certainly have a shot at the presidency. But if they don't win it, I think the map becomes very difficult, because if Republicans lose Georgia, they likely lose Arizona as well. And if they're not winning Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they lose the election hands down. You'd need Nevada or something like that to really bail them out if you lose one of those states. So the map becomes very tricky for Republicans, and I think Democrats do have a bit of an advantage. As I talked about in my last video a couple days ago, which I guess was last year now, I think on the 30th, Democrats and Joe Biden still have a built-in advantage when it comes to the Electoral College, because all of these states are leaning in their direction going into 2024. It's up to Republicans to sort of change the tide, switch the momentum, and expand their voter base in order to win. Anyway, that's it for today's video. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Again, as always, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.